Hey STEM, to wrap up our school year and to wrap up our discussion about plastic, we're going to look at an experiment if plastic sinks or floats, okay? This directly impacts us because right down the road from most of us, we have the lake. And the lake is a body of water that is really polluted by plastic. If you guys can remember back in September when we went on our walk through the park nearby the lake, we picked up tons of plastic pieces that eventually would have made their way into the water, okay? It's important to understand that even litter you find on the street, it can get washed into sewers and it can get washed right into the lake as well, okay? So with this experiment, what we're gonna be looking at is how plastic getting into the lake affects different types of organisms that live in there. Okay, so there are three zones of where animals like to live and where their feeding habits are. So based on those zones, they will eat certain types of plastic, whether it sinks or floats. Okay, so the first zone is the surface zone, and the surface zone is literally anything off the top of the water. So where it's actually meeting the air. It's not sinking or lowering into the water, it's right on top. So when we're looking at plastics here, we're looking at things that are floating, and those are going to be commonly ingested by surface feeding animals. Surface feeding animals can be birds, a lot of times some turtles, they'll feed off the surface. So those plastics are really getting in the way of their eating, and they end up eating them right off the top, okay? The middle layer, the pelagic zone, okay, it is where it's not quite sinking to the bottom or floating on the surface, it's kind of laying right within. And a lot of diving birds will eat in this area because they will stick their beaks in the water and pull out a fish that lives in that zone. So if plastic is kind of being buoyant, which we like to say means it's floating in there, a lot of animals will eat from there, like fish as well, okay? And then the last zone is the benthic zone, which is basically bottom feeders or along the floor with the sand, the rocks, and the mud. So animals that eat along the bottom are going to be affected by plastic that sinks down into that zone, okay? So we are going to look at a bunch of different plastics here, and you're going to have to watch whether it sinks, floats, or kind of stays buoyant in the middle, okay? Okay, and then depending on the chart that you guys are going to look at in the slide, based on where it falls in this lake that I have made, you guys are going to decide which animals are affected the most, okay? So real quick, before I get started, here is the lake. So it is just a clear dish, so you guys should be able to see whether it's sinking or floating, okay? And that is sort of what's going to represent our Lake Erie for now. So I'm just going to drop some items in. I'm not really going to say much about it. You guys are going to watch this video, and then you need to fill out the table whether it's sank, floated, and then which zone it fell into, and then which animals would be affected by it, okay? So to start, we're going to start with just a regular plastic water bottle. These are really, really littered, and these are found all over the place, and the plastic water bottle is going to stay up on the surface of the water, okay? So you can see it is floating. If we fill it with some water, it will start to sink a little bit. So if it is an uncapped water bottle, eventually it will stay buoyant or it will sink to the bottom, okay? So depending on how you look at plastic water bottles, they kind of fall into all of the zones in the lake, okay? So that's the first one. All right, then we have a shampoo bottle. So a shampoo bottle is going to kind of float but also kind of sink. So it's going to fall into that middle zone, which is going to be floating below the surface. And remember, a lot of times these are cut up into little pieces or they've broken apart. So parts of them will sink in certain areas and parts of them will float, okay? But the shampoo bottle is going to fall into that middle zone and it's going to float beneath the surface, okay? Then we have food packaging. So this is just a piece of food packaging that I actually took off of a piece of cheese, okay? So it's just clear food packaging, all right? And when we put it into the water, so you guys can get a better look at this, okay? I don't know if you can see very well. It is floating up there on the surface, okay? We can push on it a little, but it's going to just come right back up to the surface, okay? So this one is going to be a surface floating plastic. All right, then we have a medicine bottle, okay? So when I put the medicine bottle in, okay, it is going to sink right to the bottom, okay? So the bottle part has touched the bottom of my lake. The cap is going to float on the top, okay? So if you had a medicine bottle capped and thrown away, we'll see how that works. Okay, the capped medicine bottle is also floating toward the bottom, okay? So separate, which is how a lot of things get thrown away, the medicine bottle is going to sink right to that bottom level of the lake, okay? Then we have a plastic bag. So I just ripped a piece off. A lot of times plastic bags are ripped or torn, and they will be floating all over the place. So here we can see that the plastic bag is floating. Now I can push on it a little and try to sink it, and it will go to that middle layer. So the plastic bag, depending on how it has fallen, it's either going to stay to the surface or it's going to fall into that middle layer. It's not gonna sink all the way to the bottom, okay? Then we have an egg carton. So I just cut a small part of it out to show you. So the egg carton, no matter how much I really push on it, okay, it's going to come back up to the surface. So it's going to stay on the surface level. Then we have caps, bottle caps, okay? So the bottle cap, it is also going to stay on the surface. Now, the bottle cap is like this though, it's going to sort of start to sink a little into that middle zone, okay? But typically bottle caps, which I'll put a couple other caps in to show you, okay? Bottle caps are going to stay floating on the surface and they're going to be a target of food by a lot of those birds that fly by and see it on the surface, okay? A pen cap, so part of a pen. We'll let it sit for a minute, push on it, okay? So the pen cap, to me, is sort of floating surface to that middle layer, okay? If I tap on it and get some water inside, it's definitely sinking into that middle, but it is not touching the ground of my lake, okay? So you can either say the pen cap is a surface or a middle layer in that little zone where a lot of the fish or the diving birds will feed, okay? And then lastly, we have plastic silverware. So I put the plastic silverware in and it is definitely below the surface level, okay? It is not at the bottom, it's floating in that middle area. Okay, so this is just a simple experiment. You can try this at home with lots of different types of plastic. I just picked some of the more common pieces or items that we typically have around our house, okay? And things that we might not know if we recycle or we put them in the right spot and they end up going into the water, okay? So you can see that plastic doesn't always stay on the surface, it doesn't sink to the bottom, it's always going to be in a certain zone, and then the animals are going to be affected by which zone it falls into, okay? So if you guys are interested in trying this at home, you just need water and different items of plastic and see how they sink and float, and you can let me know what you guys find out, okay? If not, get this experiment done, use the table to fill in your information, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye guys!